Yount-Davis was colorful, courageous, carefree. He was our champion and a chain breaker. And all these things tied together is what made him the legend. Dad was born January the 8th, 1948 to France Fireball Davis and Gladys Wilson Davis. He was the oldest of four brothers. Dad was born in 48 and Mike was born shortly after him, Randy, and then Terry. They were relatively a poor family. My grandfather had bought a 4-room house on what would become known as Davis Mountain, oddly enough, in the 1940s. The house's claim to fame was this. When Interstate 40 was being cut through Iker, they had to blast a lot of rock to make room for the highway. And my grandfather took his car and he would drive down to where they were putting an interstate, and he would load up the stones and the boulders into the back of his car and drive them up almost one at a time. And over the course of a couple of years, he stacked every one of those rocks and made his wood side house into a rock home. He went a step further and actually painted every rock a different color. And I think that's one reason why my dad turned out the way he did. That's one reason why you could describe my dad as colorful, was because that's the example that he was given. When my dad was a kid, he and his buddies, they'd play baseball. That's what they did to pass the time. And they would go down to the old dairy farm across the road, and they would literally play baseball in the dairy farm with the cows. And they would use dried cow patties as bases, and that's exactly what they would play on as kids. In fact, when he was around 10 years old, 11 years old, he worked at the dairy farm to get milk for his family. That's how his family got milk, and they were able to buy bread and different things. And he was helping in that with his family. In fact, many times as a kid, when Dad would go back to school and all the kids were doing show and tell and telling everybody what they got for Christmas and all this stuff, my dad oftentimes would tell stories about what the neighbor kids got, because he didn't get anything. They were from a poor family, and my grandfather, he drank a little bit. He suffered from PTSD before they knew PTSD was a thing, which was a fun-loving guy, a funny guy, a guy that people loved to be around. But in those moments, he went to a dark place and really caused some trouble for his family in that aspect. And so many times for Christmas, he wouldn't get anything, and he'd have to tell stories about what the other kids got. And that kind of helped him pass things along as if he'd actually got something.
I met Wayne first in the 7th grade at Iker Elementary. And one of my first recollections of Wayne was that, and one day we got in trouble. And back then, teachers were allowed to paddle students. And they would proudly usually display one beside their desk, and it would typically have holes in it. Well, Wayne and I got into something together, and so the principal proceeded to both give us a whack. But then Wayne, this was 7th grade, I think Wayne went to George Hildebrand as an 8th grade. And then we met up as a freshman at Hildebrand High, and I was fortunate enough to play baseball with Wayne.
Growing up, me and Wayne was always close. There was 4 of us, and I remember at one bed, us 4 boys, 2 of us slept that way and 2 of us slept the other way. And we was a close family back then, and me and Wayne played a lot of ball all the way through. I remember when he fullback at Hildebrand High School, and I got to play on the JV team. I got to move up the last couple games. We got to play together then, and I always looked up to Wayne. We were just always close to life. I remember a lot of times growing up, we didn't have much, and we had Daddy let us have down at the Pure Oil Station out at Iker. leave Wayne in charge of us, and a loaf of bread and a pack of cheese. And that supposed to last a couple of days. And in the evening we used to work on Penland's dairy farm, right there they call it Dairy Barn, road there near Eastburg School. We'd haul hay, make silo, and feed the pigs, ran Penland, and putting up hay and stuff, and we just did a lot together and camped out together, and just always was close family. And Wayne was like the elder statement of the family. And I can remember one time in school, I don't know, I must be in 5th grade, 4th grade, something like that. And bigger boys would take our lunch money, which we didn't have much to start with. And Wayne didn't want to know why I hadn't been eating and everything. And I didn't want to tell because I was afraid them bigger boys beat us up. And anyhow, if I end up finally telling them, and make a long story short, and boys never did take no more money away from me. Wayne showed them who was the boss.
Dad loved baseball, and he was real good at it. And actually, once as a child, he had gotten so good, he was playing, I think 10 years old, 11 years old for the town of Hildebrand, and he made the All-Star team. And in the same summer, his dad was working a job in Hickory, and he would take him to work with him, and he would drop him off at the local ballpark, and he actually started playing baseball with the Hickory City team also, and needless to say, he made the All-Stars. He was a good ball player. So he was playing on the All-Star team with Hildebrand and also playing on the All-Star team with Hickory, which wasn't that big of a deal until they played each other in the championship game. In fact, as a kid, they had a big field out beside of their house, and my grandfather was associated with Shapps Grove Baptist Church, and they loved ball so much, softball, baseball, that he actually put a ball field in that field, and that's where the church played their league baseball, was on that field beside their house. So as a kid, you know, after their cow patty days, once they had the field, they could go out in the side yard, had a backstop and everything, and they could play ball all the time. And they had an old shed that my grandfather would take my dad in, and he'd have a rubber ball, and they would go inside the shed, and my grandfather would just pitch to him nonstop, just constantly, and let my dad hit out of that shed. And just awesome memories as a childhood. They were poor. They didn't have a whole lot, but they sure enjoyed life, and they sure knew how to have a good time. And it really gave them a balance in life, knowing that their happiness wasn't based on what they had, but it was just based on who they were. And it was just the man that he wanted to be, and that's exactly what he became in his older years. He was just a happy, fun-loving guy who didn't need things, he didn't need stuff to make him that way. He just, he was happy at heart.
Yeah, I want to say over the years, Wayne was my lifetime friend. We both went to school at Iron School, graduated the same year, and we would always meet at Chicken in the Basket, and I remember those days.
We just all hung out there as teenagers, and Wayne was always the life of the party, that's for sure.
As Dad got older, he attended Hildebrand High School, and he graduated there in 1967. He would have actually graduated in 1966. When he was a kid, he had polio, and he actually missed a whole year of school with that sickness, and it obviously bumped him back a year in school. But he played 3 sports growing up. He played football, he played basketball, he played baseball. In fact, in 8th grade, his family had temporarily moved to George Hildebrand. They were doing some remodeling at the house they were in, and I believe his grandfather, my great-grandfather, had a house out there, and I think that's where they lived for this year that this was going on at their home. And they went to George Hildebrand School, and in 8th grade, my dad actually played varsity baseball with George Hildebrand, so he's a really good ball player. Many times, actually, growing up, and even as recently as the last time that he and I went out to eat breakfast, which we did every Friday, for the last several weeks of his life. We'd go eat, Chicken in the Basket or Granny's Kitchen or somewhere on Friday mornings. We'd get breakfast together, which was pretty awesome. But it never failed. We'd go out to these places to eat together. And these old timers would come up to him and they would yell his name, Wayne, to get his attention. He'd turn around and they'd start talking and all this. And almost without fail, they would at some point during the conversation turn to me and they'd say something like this, son, your daddy was the best ball player this town's ever seen. And that was pretty awesome. The last time we went out, we were at Chicken in the Basket, and one of the older men leaned over the table. He said, boy, ain't nobody could hit him like your daddy could. And that's what Dad was. You know, he was a local legend, you know, because of his baseball ability. And people loved him.
One time in March, pretty sure it was the 13th, we went up to Bear Island, and we played baseball in the big field. Papa hit like a home run if it was on one of our fields, and he hit it left-handed, I'm pretty sure.
And I had a guy who was at Hardy's one time in Hildebrand, and I had this guy tell me how people used to travel just to see Hildebrand play baseball because they knew my dad was going to be in center field. And he told me how there wasn't a ball hit into the outfield my dad couldn't get to, and how fast he was, and how good his glove was. And another guy told me one time, he said, nobody tried to advance on your dad. Nobody tried to get an extra base on your dad when he was in the outfield because he could throw it harder than anybody on the field, and he would oftentimes throw them out. And that was pretty cool. And they actually used him to pitch. A lot of times in relief, he didn't have very good control, but he threw hard. In fact, that's what the Minnesota Twins actually wanted him to do when they signed him. He was a good hitter. He was a good outfielder. He swung right-handed, but he threw left-handed. And man, that was a hot commodity to have a left-handed pitcher that could throw hard. That's why they signed him. They wanted to convert him to a pitcher. He wasn't crazy about that. You know, he wanted to be in the field every day. But anyway, that's what they did there. And in 1968, he did sign with the Minnesota Twins. I remember in my early 20s, Dad was still with the News Herald doing some things there. And my wife and I at the time were running the paper out. We had just gotten married. And we were down in the archives area of the News Herald, and we were looking at these old newspapers. I mean, we started back in the 1940s and 50s and 60s and all this stuff. And we actually found an article about my dad in that paper, which was so cool because we found out his senior year, he was voted all-conference. He was voted one of the best players in the region, and it just went on and on about how great a ball player Dad was. And Dad was seeing this for the first time. He didn't even know that he was awarded all-conference and that he was one of the best players in the region, and he didn't even know this newspaper article even existed, and which I thought was pretty cool to get a chance to share that with him the first time that he saw that. But Dad signed with the Minnesota Twins in the winter of 1968. He was assigned to Charlotte to play at the old Crockett Park, the old wooden stadium, actually where the Charlotte Knights started before they built the new stadium, and obviously the newest stadium downtown now. But he went down there to play with them. But at the same time in 1968, obviously the Vietnam War was going on. He was drafted by the United States Army to go to Vietnam. He signed with the United States Marine Corps, hoping it would buy him an extra 3 months that he could actually play baseball and pursue his dream of being a professional ball player. But when the Minnesota Twins found out that he had been drafted and obviously enlisted with the United States Marine Corps, they released him at that point, and you know, he went off to war and went off to boot camp. When he got back, they wanted him to come back and play again, but at that time when he came back home from war, he made more money playing mill ball than he did in professional baseball. That's when the mills, they would just pay you a salary just to play baseball at that time, and he did really well doing that. Plus he didn't want to leave, and you know, he had a young family, and he had been gone for all this time at war, and he wanted to be home and all that stuff and sleep in his own bed, and he really wasn't too intrigued about traveling with professional baseball at that time.
He was home from leave and had a wreck in his car,
and he rode over with his mom and dad, and we had an old football, and he kicked that football so high it just disappeared in the sky, you know, and then it finally come back down. But we was amazed by all that.
After Dad signed with the United States Marine Corps, he and some of his buddies went out one night, and really they were into no good. He had got a brand new 1968 Chevelle Super Sport with a signing bonus from the Minnesota Twins, and one night he and his buddies, they were going out, they were driving westbound on Highway 70. The guy behind him, I can't remember his name right now, but I remember speaking with him, was driving a Dodge Charger. And to hear him tell the story, and I heard it from the guy, he claims he was going 150 miles an hour, and he could not catch my dad in the Super Sport. So I don't know how fast he was going, but it was obviously in excess of 150 miles an hour in that Super Sport. And he lost control up close to where the Hildebrand First Baptist Church is. He took out several telephone poles. There's a huge article in the paper about it. As a matter of fact, even recently, there was a 50-year kind of a commemory of that event that came out on Facebook as part of the News Herald Archives. And so it actually showed that, which was pretty cool. And Dad surviving that crash is a miracle in itself. He should not have lived beyond that. If you'd have seen those old steel, you know how those cars were made back then, I mean, they were tanks for crying out loud, and it was bent like a horseshoe as it just continued to clip these telephone poles going down the road. And he was a little intoxicated at the time. The judge was going to throw him under the jail. And my grandfather walked into the courtroom and talks to this judge. He says, "Your Honor," he said, "I know what my son did was wrong." He said, "But he's gotten drafted by the United States Army. He's enlisted into the United States Marine Corps. He's leaving for boot camp in a couple of weeks." And immediately the judge looked at my dad. He slammed the gavel. He said, "Case dismissed, son. You're going through hell enough." And I'm not sure if it was if he was referring to Vietnam or the Marine Corps, because they were both going to be a tough challenge for my dad at that time. Dad boarded a bus in Charlotte and had nothing with him outside of, I believe, the pair of clothes that he was wearing. And he boarded the bus in Charlotte. They took him to Parris Island. He stepped out onto the famous yellow footprints there at Parris Island, and he quickly came into that place to recruit. And 12, 13 weeks later, he left the United States Marine. And that's probably one of the greatest achievements that my dad had in his life, was being a United States Marine. He always wore that label with pride. In his later years of life, he always wore the hats, the shirts, he had the license plates. I mean, everything. He was proud to be a Marine. And I remember one time we were sitting in his living room, this was recently, and Brantley, my son, was sitting there beside of him, and an Army commercial came on. My son got excited because it's military. He just assumed it's all the same. And the Army commercial comes on, and Brantley looks up, and he kind of looks over at my dad, and he called him Papa Wayne. He said, "Papa Wayne, look." And my dad, he'd always had this silly grin sometimes, and when he was up to something, and he looked over at Brantley and said, "Son, not everybody can be a Marine." And he just kind of laughed, and I thought that pretty well summed it up. He knew that the Marines was head and shoulders above the rest, and that's just how he was.
But we went to the Parris Island. They showed us around. Papa told us stories about they'll put you in the gas chamber, and he said you would never know who you really are until you go in there. And he said they'll give you an air mask, not tell you how to put them on. He said something like all the people with him weren't that great of a group, and they gave him ones that didn't work, and they put him in there in the gas chamber, and the guys were trying to beat down the door, trying to get out, and the Bible said it was like snot, blood coming out of their nose. And he said it was disgusting.
So Dad leaves leaves Parris Island, and from there I believe he might have went to Camp Lejeune for a brief time, and then to Camp Pendleton in California for their final preparations for warfare. And they got on a plane, a commercial airliner, and flew into Vietnam. And when they were flying in, as he recalls, they were taking enemy fire, actually on the commercial liner. And he said he remembers that their personal belongings they had on the plane, they were told to leave, and they were going to land, touch down, open the door. They had to jump off the plane, get off the plane, and the plane was taken off again to get out of there. I guess so it didn't take any more incoming fire just to get back to safety. So when he landed in Vietnam, that's what he was welcomed by on that commercial flight was oncoming fire from the enemy. Being in the northern end of the battle, they fought against the NVA. They were fighting against trained soldiers in their territory, and so they had a different battle ahead of them. Nothing could prepare them for what they were about to face. He tells the story in another interview, so I won't get into a lot of the details, but he fought at a place which would come to be known as Hamburger Hill. He was a head machine gunner, which the life expectancy of a head machine gunner, from what I've heard or what I understand, was about 30%, which wasn't real good. He told me this even recently. We were driving down the road, and I was just trying to soak in as much as I could from my dad at this time. He looked over at me and he said this. He said, "Son," he would always tell me, "Don't sweat the small stuff and everything's small." No matter what I was going through, that was always his saying, and because I worried about everything. So here he is sitting here, and he says, "Son, one of the hardest things I've ever had to deal with as a head machine gunner was having men coming in that was under my command. And I was responsible for these men and telling these men where to go and tell these men what to do." He said one of the hardest things was when I would tell them to go do something and they would lose their life doing it. And I began to really understand in that moment what he meant by don't sweat the small stuff and everything small, because nothing that I face in this life compares to literally someone's life like that being in my hands and them losing it as a result of it. Once he finally got out of the firefights and out of the battle, ended up going down to Okinawa. And down in Okinawa, his rank, he was a drill instructor. That's what he was doing. He was preparing the newcomers in Okinawa for battle. He had the rank of corporal officially, but he was fulfilling the duties of a drill instructor as a sergeant. Very quickly, within a matter of just a few months, my dad went from being a private all the way to corporal, which also involved 2 meritorious combat promotions, which the letters are pretty cool coming from the United States President. That's a pretty awesome thing. But he did that. He also got a Purple Heart when he was over there. His guys, his machine gunners, they were set up in foxholes. One night they were taking incoming fire, and one of his foxholes with his new recruits, he had just climbed into that foxhole. That was his protocol. Every night, if you have new recruits, you spend that first night with those guys, getting them prepared and helping them during their first firefight and all this. And Dad was in there with those guys, and another one of the foxholes was taking incoming fire, so he was running to support his men on the other side. And when he had gotten out of that foxhole, it actually took a mortar round, killing all the men inside of it. And he also took the shrapnel from the mortar round, and as a result, got a Purple Heart. So he's carried that honor even now. But when all that was done, he went back to Okinawa. That was a place where they were finally back around civilization. They had a town and all these things they could do. And one night, Dad and his buddies was in a bar, and Dad picked a fight with some guys, and apparently these guys were mouthing off, and Dad mouthed off, and they were going to go out and fight. What these guys didn't realize was the men with my dad were trained fighters. They were trained in jiu-jitsu. They were gold glove boxers. I mean, they were pretty tough dudes. And as the story goes, when they walk outside the establishment to actually begin fighting, my dad had been drinking a little bit, and he had passed out and actually fell in a ditch, and had a scar on his chin that I've always noticed growing up. And he got that scar when he actually fell into the ditch there in Okinawa when he passed out. When he woke up, his guys had nearly killed every one of those men that came outside of the bar that night, and Dad ended up in the break a little bit for that deal. But that's just what they did. He was a drill instructor. He was basically a sergeant. Had fulfilled that role as a sergeant, even though he was a corporal by title. They were coming home finally after all this time. they tried to get Dad to re-enlist, and you know, obviously they promised him rank and all these things, and he wasn't interested in that. Matter of fact, before he ever went to Vietnam, there was a colonel, I believe it was a colonel, that tried to keep him in the States to play for the United States Marine Corps baseball team, their national baseball team, and he wasn't able to work that out, and Dad ended up going. But on their way home, I can't remember if it was because he didn't have a haircut or what had happened. He had gotten bumped off of a flight when his men were coming home, I think on 2 or 3 occasions. And the first time was because I think he had missed a haircut, and the next 2 times was because he just couldn't get a seat. So the third time they were coming through, one of the officers came through and saw my dad, and the officers loved my dad, what he did, and they saw him. They said, Mr. Davis, or I forget what they called him, corporal or something like that, you know, why are you not already home? And he told them what had happened. And the officer said, well, you're not getting looked over this time. You're riding with us. And he got to ride back with the officers. He said it was a great experience. The plane was a lot nicer. The accommodations were a lot nicer. They flew in about 2 hours north of Camp Pendleton to the officers' base. But to get down to his buddies, he had to hitchhike. And he did that. He hitchhiked. And he tells the story of this beautiful blonde in a convertible picking him up. And he threw his duffel bag in as he's hitchhiking down in California to get back down to Camp Pendleton. She takes him to a friend of hers that she said had a Skylark that could get him to Camp Pendleton. Dad thinks it's a car. And they pull into the airport, and this guy has an airplane. And Dad hops in the airplane, and they take off, and he's already skittish as it is. And this guy starts doing tricks upside down, sideways, up, down, and all this stuff. And Dad thought, well, you know, of all these things I've survived in my life, the car crashes, the incoming fire, the mortar rounds, all these things. I've survived Vietnam, I've survived war. Now this moron's going to kill me here on this plane. So these thoughts were going through his head, and I think he wanted to kill the guy driving the plane flying the plane by the time they landed. But they got there, and he made it back to his buddies at Camp Pendleton. Probably one of the saddest commentaries for the men that fought, and the ladies also that fought in Vietnam, was the reception they got when they came home. Dad flew back into Charlotte, North Carolina. He was out of the service. His time was over. And you know, nowadays they have a respect for the military. There's an honor for the military. Even in World War II, there was an honor and respect for the men that came home and fought and gave their, you know, all these things. And when Dad got there, there was no great reception. In fact, he was one of the lucky ones, because most of them, when they got home, people looked at him with disgust. People were mean. People would cuss at him, call him names. And these were just boys. I mean, they were 18, 19, 20 years old. They didn't ask to be there. If my dad had it his way, he'd be playing professional baseball for the Minnesota Twins. I mean, that was his goal. That was his dream. And because of him being drafted into the military, he was giving up what he had always dreamed to do. He went out and fought and gave his very best and nearly lost his life and saw many of his friends lose their lives. And then he comes home, and that's the way they're received. That's the reception that they get. And when he landed, the only people there to greet him was his mom, his dad, and his 3 younger brothers. And that's really all he needed. He didn't need applause. He didn't need accolades. He just wanted his family. He wanted to be home, and that's what he did. And because of the way those men were treated, really, for the next 30-some years of his life, he never spoke of being in the military. He never spoke of being a Marine. He never spoke of his experiences in Vietnam. It wasn't until I was in college, he had already had cancer, and I was writing my dissertation for my degree in college as a history major on my dad. And during that time, I was actually able to interview him and kind of go through some of the stuff that he experienced in Vietnam. And that was the first time in my life that I had ever heard any of these stories, because he didn't talk about it. He didn't share it with anybody. And it's just the grace of God that he didn't suffer from PTSD. He didn't suffer from these things because he experienced real battle. He told stories how when his men would go out, he had a point man on a mission one night, and that point man got blew up, and he ran to pick him up, and he grabbed him up underneath the shoulders, under his armpits, And as he began to pull from his arms, his other man pulled from the legs, and his body separated. And oddly enough, one of his best friends named Bushwhack, my dad actually nicknamed him Bushwhack. He gave him that nickname. I didn't know that until recently. But they were best friends. And recently, actually at my dad's memorial service, he brought me the picture of that man. I've heard that story for years, and to hear this other gentleman come in and validate everything my dad had ever told me just reaffirms that not only was he a legend because of what he did in sports, he was also a legend because of what he accomplished and what he did in the military. His bravery and just his selflessness and all these things.
We became friends instantly. I'm from South Carolina, he was from North Carolina. And we slept together, talked together, eat together, went on patrols together. He was my friend, and you say it like that. In a combat zone, you became a lot like brothers. And I loved him like a brother. But we was in firefights together, and I'm going to tell you how they had to name me Bushwhack. My name is Lawrence H. Miller. But we was on patrol, and we got ambushed, and I told them they bushwhacked us. And that's how I got my nickname.
When he came home, he started a whole new life. And he did start a family. You know, he had gotten married and had a daughter named Leslie, and that marriage didn't last long, but he started getting grounded in some things, and he and my mother met in 1975. My mother was a waitress at a local steakhouse in Hickory on Highway 70, real close to where Randy Marion car dealership is now. That's where she worked, and my dad goes into this place, and there she is, and she had just come out of a marriage and that didn't end well, and she also had a daughter named Michelle, and so here these two come together. They both have these small girls, and my dad looks at her, and they fall in love with each other, and by August the 8th of 1975, they go to South Carolina, they get married, and they start their life together as a family, and raising these two little girls. My mother got saved around that time. She gave her life to Jesus around that time. And my dad he wasn't raised in church necessarily, but his grandmother, Mamaw Hill as we call her, would take him and I guess some of the other boys, I know him in particular, to Akron Church of God. That's where she went, and that's where my dad would go from time to time. So when they came home and my mother got saved and he got in church and they were getting their life to that point, they started attending that church. And man, he became basically a youth pastor. He wasn't called a preacher or anything, but they fulfilled the role of youth pastor in that church for many years. And I remember as a kid, you know, they had what they called the CSBs for the boys, and they had the joy bells for the girls, and they would always do stuff. My mother was over the joy bells, my dad was over the CSBs, and they were always taking the young people places and always doing things with them and playing games and coming to the house and always doing stuff at the church. And I still have people today on social media or other outlets that contact me just telling me how awesome it was. And I remember standing there in the line at the memorial service, people coming through the line and saying, you know, you may not know who I am, but your daddy and your mama was over the young people at that church, and I was one of those young people. And it's just really cool looking back and seeing the impact that you know, my mom and dad had on the lives of those young people that's really carried with them to now, and just made a difference in their lives. That's pretty cool.
Met him at a church that he was going to at the time. When I started going there, I just seen a uniqueness about him. But one time in particular, I just always think about, we started at the church that we were going to at the time, we started a motorcycle ministry, and I was over the motorcycle ministry, and Brother Wayne really encouraged me to do it. I mean, he was the kind of person, if you went to him and said, I was thinking about doing this or thinking about doing that, he'd say, let's do it. He'd say, let's do it. And then he was just encouraging and would help you and lift you up any way he could. Well, we started the motorcycle ministry, and we go on the motorcycle rides and stuff, and help people, and he'd want to go, but he didn't have a motorcycle. But he had a truck, and he had coolers, and he became the person who followed along behind the motorcycle rides, and he would provide drinks, and when we'd stop, he'd have the drinks and everything, and it just always amazed me that I never really thought that need was there before until he started doing it. And we'd stop on our rides, and we knew Brother Wayne was there with his truck and bottles of water and just whatever we needed that he was there with, and I always just look up to him for that, because he seen the need and he provided that need. That's just the kind of man that he was.
I was stationed at Cherry Point, North Carolina in 1971, and I hitched across North Carolina to come to Wayne's wedding. Now everybody knows Wayne and Debbie. They've been married 42 years, and from the time Wayne first met Debbie, he was crazy about her until last Wednesday. He was the love of her life, but they were both married before. So when I hitchhiked across North Carolina to go to his wedding, it was his first wedding. They had the wedding and the honeymoon. The next day I had to hitch back to the coast. Wayne told me, he said, we're going to Myrtle Beach on our honeymoon, and I don't want you to hitchhike all the way back across the state, so we'll give you a ride. And I said, well, Wayne, this is your honeymoon. And he said, well, you're not going on the honeymoon, you're just going to go back as far as Cherry Point, we'll let you out, and then we'll go on down to Myrtle Beach. I said, well, that's an hour out of your way. He said, well, I'd like to take you back. Now Wayne had been out of the Marines probably a year, and I had been in the Marines about a year. He got out when I went in, and this was after Vietnam for him, but it was before Vietnam for me. So he wanted to do that for me, even though this was his wedding. I said, I can't believe he's doing that. So he had a Ford Torino, and they had marked it up during the wedding. It said, going to Myrtle Beach to get a little sun, S-O-N. And just married and all that stuff. So it's still on the car. We're going down the road, Wayne and Ann are in the front seat and I'm in the back seat, and we ride a couple hours. And Ann said, I'm really tired, Wayne. I'm really tired. Pull over. So he pulls the car over, and she says, I'm so tired. Dennis, switch places with me. So Ann gets in the back seat, and I get in the front seat, and Ann right away, she just nods off, lays down the back seat and goes to sleep. So Wayne and I are riding down Interstate 40, and cars start going by, and they're waving at us and laughing. And so Wayne said, boy, everybody in North Carolina sure is friendly. I said, yeah, they are. I said, wait a minute. Here's these two guys going down Interstate 40, and the car says going to Myrtle Beach. I said, oh, okay. I said, Wayne, I said, I'm going to sit down a little bit, and I'm going to take a little nap myself. And so I get down in the seat, and I ride like that all the way till it gets dark. And after it gets dark, then I sit back up in the seat again and start talking to him. But I pretended like to get down and nod off. And so anyway, it gets dark, and he takes me on down to Myrtle Beach. To Cherry Point, lets me out, and they go on to Myrtle Beach on their honeymoon.
So Mom and Dad, once they got married, they both worked in insurance. Actually, for a long time, they were with Western Southern Life. And Dad he excelled for many years in insurance. And actually, I remember as a kid, every Wednesday morning, they would go play golf. And in my memory, it was at Pine Mountain Golf Club, out in the sticks, out in the middle of nowhere. And I remember going out there with him and his buddies from the office and playing golf. And that's one thing that Dad never separated himself from his family. He wasn't a guy that went out and lived a different life at work and came home as a different person, or lived a different life in public and came home or went to church. And he was the same all the time. And he was a great example of that. And I remember as a kid, we would go to the golf course and we'd get on the golf cart. And that was back in the day. They had this triangle steering wheel. It wasn't like an actual steering wheel. You just kind of moved it to go left and right. And he would let me drive the golf cart. I was 4 years old. I was 5 years old, and he'd let me drive the golf cart. I remember this one time in particular. I can't remember the hole. I think it was hole number 3. Is a par 3. And after hole number 3, it goes downhill, and it kind of zigzags down to the next hole where you tee off. And I think number 4 might even be another par 3. And as we're going down there, it was Daddy, and I was sitting on his lap, and I was driving. Or actually, he was beside of me. Again, I'm 5 years old. He's beside of me. I'm driving. I'm using the pedals. He had to be crazy to let me drive this thing, especially going down this hill. And a guy named Fritz. So anyway, we're driving down through there, and next thing you know, I'm losing control of this thing, and my dad's trying to get the wheel and get control, and I go around this curve real sharp, and Fritz goes flying off the golf cart, rolling down this hill, and he just jumped up. He said, "I'm all right." We all laughed about it and went on, and you know, Dad never got upset about those things. He just rolled with it. One day, my sister, maybe two of my sisters, I know in particular Bridget was there, but they were at a golf course, and they had gotten the golf cart and literally were driving on the green, which is a major no-no at a golf course. And of course my dad got them off, and he explained to them why you're not supposed to do that, but didn't get upset. That's just what he was. He just rolled with the punches, and he was carefree. And that's just the way he's always been. I remember even at one point, probably the mid-1980s, Mom and Dad started Davis Insurance Agency. They went into real estate not long after that. But before I get into that, I do need to back up. My mom and dad got married August 8th, 1975. A year later, October, my sister was born, Bridget. They wanted her to be a boy so bad, they had determined her middle name, or the child's middle name, would be Wayne, after my dad. And when she was born, she obviously was a girl, she wasn't a boy. And instead of changing the middle name, they just made it Waynette. So she's had the great privilege and honor of being a Waynette her whole life, and she's actually taken great pride in that name, and she carries it with honor and loves it. But Mom and Dad went into real estate, which my mother really excelled at. She done really well in real estate. My dad did good too. But as a result of their adventure, I want to say, in real estate, we moved all the time growing up. I believe I counted one time, from the time that I was born to the time that I got married, I lived in 15 different houses. And it may have been more. I think at one time maybe we counted 18, but I'm thinking 15 is the number. So I went to almost every school in Burke County. And that's just the way it was growing up. They'd find a good deal, they'd buy it. Back then you could trade a boat for a house. I mean, it just wasn't that big of a deal. You couldn't do that stuff now, but they were always in real estate. They dabbled in it all the time. Even now, I know my dad's been gone now for a few weeks, but even now they both still have an active license in real estate, and I have been using it for all these years, even if it is kind of as a side hobby, so to speak. But when my dad was in his early 40s, he essentially, I'm going to use with quotes, kind of early retired, so to speak. He no longer really worked a typical job, if you will. He ran a paper route, and just to kind of supplement their income. And it was something he had started at 10 o'clock in the morning, and he'd be done by 2 or 3 o'clock in the afternoon, and actually made good money running the paper routes. I think, you know, there in the 1990s, he had a tremendous route, and he drove a Ford Festiva, which cost maybe $3.50 to fill it up with gas, and you could go forever. And he made over $1,000 a week back then, just running paper routes, you know, plus what he had in retirement and, you know, through insurance and real estate, the things they did and all these things. But, you know, that enabled him to have flexibility to be a dad, you know, to have flexibility to be a coach and all these things, and to travel. You know, when they were in insurance and real estate and all these things, it wasn't uncommon. Daddy would walk in the door and he'd say, "All right, y'all got 10 minutes to pack. We're going to the beach." And literally, 10 minutes is what you had, and what you had packed and what you didn't pack. You were in the car and you were gone. That's just the way it was. He was so spontaneous when it came to that stuff. And one night, he had gotten home, and we had just built a new house. We're in our new home, and we all pile up in the car, get our stuff, and next thing you know, Daddy's backing out of the garage. Well, he forgets the garage door's closed. He literally barrels through that garage door, knocks it down, backs up to the road, looks at the door, looks at our new house, and says, "It'll be there when we get back." And we took off to the beach. And many nights as a kid, you know, I would go to bed, I'd go to sleep in my bed at home, and I would wake up at the beach. It happened a lot. And I'll never forget one time, we were in Charlotte. We always hit Krispy Kreme on Independence on our way to the beach, always. Every time we go to the beach, we stopped at Krispy Kreme on Independence. But I remember, as a kid, I was 3 or 4 years old, and I had this just bleached blonde hair. And I tan real dark and all this. So we're in this Krispy Kreme, and I'm in there with my dad, and this lady looks at my dad and says, "Sir, is that your son? That blonde-headed boy, is that your son?" So he is automatically just beaming with pride, thinking, "Yes, that's my boy. Is he not the cutest thing?" and all this stuff. And he says, "Yes, ma'am, that's my son." Well, she says, "Well, he's peeing on the window on the storefront of Krispy Kreme. You might want to get him." And then he turned around and said, "Oh yeah, that ain't my boy. That must be somebody else's." And he continues on ordering his donuts. But that was him. He was just carefree. It didn't matter. My sisters were Google search before Google search was such a thing. We'd get to the beach, and on the main strip, you'd have not hotels, you'd have motels on each side of the road. And I remember, Dad would be driving very slowly down the strip, and literally one sister would jump out the left-hand side of the car, and another sister would jump out the right-hand side of the car, and they would literally go hotel to hotel, motel to motel, checking rates. And Dad wanted to know the lowest rate before he would decide on a motel, and that's the one we stayed in. So we never stayed anywhere fancy or anywhere like that. Most of the time it was always the cheapest place we could go, and we didn't care. I mean, we had a good time. We was with our family. We were playing on the beach, and Dad loved walking up and down the beach, and we'd take baseballs and throw and all this stuff, and us kids would be in the pool. He'd take my sisters and he'd throw them up in the air and splash and all these things. But we always had a great time going to the beach. Dad loved life. He never met a stranger. On our beach trips, he would know half the people at the RV resort by the time we left, and most of the owners and the managers of the property, he'd know them by name, and they loved him. And I remember one year, I can't remember if it was Ocean Lakes or Lakeside, but they had a hog calling contest. A hog calling contest, whoever could sound the most like a hog. And Dad won the event. There was all these people, like hundreds of people in this amphitheater, and there's my dad on stage winning a hog calling contest. And I believe in the same night they had a yodeling contest, and he actually won the yodeling contest too. So he was multi-talented. Remember, I said legendary. I remember this as a kid. Anytime Daddy would get home from running a paper route, he would always walk in the door, and he would yell this: "Daddy's home, Daddy's home, Daddy's home," and he'd say it 3 times. And it was just, I don't know, I was a teenager. I was graduated from high school sometimes, and he would still come in, and that's what he would say. And so it never failed. And he had been delivering newspapers, so he had these black ink-stained hands when he would walk in the door. And as you walk through the kitchen of the house, there was kind of this intermediate area where there was like a little hallway, there was a bathroom. You could turn left and go towards the front door of the house, or keep going towards the back of the house. Well, in this particular location, there was a white statue of this woman. I mean, a beautiful white statue, and very elegant, except for the fact she had one bare breast that stuck out. Okay, so there was a nipple that was exposed in this beautiful white statue, and it just became habit through the years. As Dad would walk past this statue, he would take his black inked fingers and he would either give the nipple a rub or he would give it a tweak. So over the years, as a result, this beautiful white statue had a black nipple. And, of course, all of us kids, we knew how it got there. Dad never wanted to admit how it got there, but we knew. He's the only one delivering newspapers with black ink-stained hands, and it certainly did have a black nipple. So that's what my dad did. He was, he was just kind of carefree, and he didn't care who he was with. If the pastor of our church was in our house and he was walking by the statue, he was going to rub the nipple. It didn't matter. He was no respecter of persons. And I think anyone that ever knew my dad would say he didn't care who you were, he was going to be himself. And he took pride in that. And it taught us to be real, and not be fake around people. And I'm glad I had that example. It's funny because going through the line at the memorial, I was encouraging people to go back and tell stories about Dad. I want to capture these videos. And so many people came through the line and said, "Oh, I've got stories to tell, but I can't share it on that video," and because of Dad, because he was colorful.
First time I met Brother Wayne, we were at their house eating pizza because We went somewhere with Brantley and they told us to come by and eat pizza. And we got there, we got to eat, and he told me he had a pen that could write in every single color. And I got so excited because I wanted to see it, and I was expecting this big old long pen. Turns out it was just a little bitty regular pen. And I asked him how it wrote in any color. He said, "Give me a color." So I told him red. He got a piece of paper and wrote R-E-D, red. He said, "You want blue?" I said, "Sure." And he wrote B-L-U-E, blue.
One of the things I remember about Wayne is he was going up to the choir, and I looked down, he had 2 different colored shoes on. And he didn't act like nothing in the world. So after church, I finally asked him, I said, "Brother, you know you got 2 different colored shoes on?" He said, "Yeah, I got another pair just like them." And I always remember for being such a outgoing and colorful person like you.
We was at youth camp, I think, 2016, and we was all eating there at the Swinging Bridge Cafe there up there in West Virginia, and I was having some trouble getting ketchup out of a bottle. And Brother Wayne noticed I was having some trouble, so he called the waitress over there to help me get the ketchup out of the bottle. And she's got a hold of that bottle, and she's sitting there doing this number right here, and Brother Wayne just starts making a noise, and everybody was rolling. Everybody was rolling. That was probably one of the funniest memories I have of Wayne. Wayne was very colorful, as Dusty put.
So I got to go to youth camp one year, and it was Rick and Wayne and I. We rode up. We had a great time going up to West Virginia, stopping eating at Fats, you know, picking on the waitresses and just having a good time. So we get up there, and they have a camper set aside for Wayne, and he said I could stay in there with him. And I guess I should have thought about things first before I said, yeah, I would stay in there, but I didn't really want to sleep in the woods, so the camper seemed better. And so the story was, I came out, and Wayne had told everybody that night that he got up in the middle of the night and he had to wake me up, and that I helped him change his diaper. And I really didn't help him change his diaper, so I wanted everybody to know that. It was a funny story, but I did not change, or have I ever changed Wayne's diaper. But Wayne always made me laugh, and the picture up there that they showed with the golf hats on, we rocked those.
Dad loved baseball. It was one of the great passions of his life, and growing up, you know, back in that day, in the 1940s and 1950s, there wasn't as many baseball teams as there is now. There were basically 16 teams, 8 in the American League, 8 in the National League. And the team that he had fallen in love with as a young boy was the Brooklyn Dodgers, and he was a Dodgers fan really for life. And so, you know, growing up, you know, as kids, he coached all of us. And I remember my sister, you know, Bridget, she, instead of playing softball, she played baseball, you know, there in Hildebrand. And my dad was the coach, and they were the Dodgers. And they were sponsored by Davis Insurance and all these things. And so I remember almost every year that I played, my dad was my coach. From the littlest of Little League to the time that I graduated high school, he coached my high school team. He was always there. And I remember almost every year we were winning a championship on some level. I found a newspaper article recently where we had a perfect season, undefeated, and just a great team. I remember almost every player on that team. And I pitched 16 no-hitters that year. I don't know how many games we played, but I pitched 16 no-hitters that year, and that was pretty cool. My dad was there for it. I remember the first time I ever hit a home run. You know, my dad was there. He was coaching third base, and I remember getting that ball in and hitting it, and it curved right over the left field foul pole. And I'll never forget when I rounded first base, once I realized it was a home run. And just looking at him and the look on his face, I think he might have been more excited than I was. So he was just kind of jumping up and down, and I'll never forget rounding third base and giving him kind of a low five as you're around the bag, and he was just so excited. You know, baseball was just a real treasure for us, and as we got older, we still loved it, and the grandkids, we'd always play, and that's how we passed time, talking about baseball, and we lived it. That's what we did. So my dad was always there growing up, and a few years ago, some of the guys that I played Little League ball with, invited us up to like a cookout in Glen Alpine where we played many of those years. And I didn't know it, my dad didn't know it, but they wanted to honor him. And this is just a few years ago. You know, I'm 35 years old. I'll be 36 in a couple of weeks. So this is, you know, recently. And to show you the impact that he had on their life, we went up there and we played a little softball, you know, and played around and goofed off a little bit. But when it was done, we went back underneath the shed there, and they presented him with this plaque. And I'd love to find that plaque. And it said something along the lines of the greatest Little League or the greatest baseball coach ever or something like that. And, really cool to see the impact that Dad had on some of those boys, because, you know, if you think about it, several of those young men or boys at that time, they didn't have dads in their life. They didn't have father figures. And my dad became that for them. I got a phone call the day after Dad died. A guy that I played with in high school, he was a couple years older than me, good ball player. His dad had left his family at a young age, so he wasn't in his life. His stepdad worked all the time, so he wasn't in his life, and he didn't have that man in his life, that father figure. And my dad, as his baseball coach, became that for him. It became his father figure. And I never knew that until the day after my dad died, and he shared that with me emotionally over the phone about what Dad meant to him, and that meant a lot to me.
Well, I didn't really know Brother Wayne too long, but I really looked up to him, and you know the whole ordeal. You know, I didn't have a father growing up, so really anywhere I go, I look for father figures. And Brother Wayne, that's what he was to me. Well, he was a father figure, and I remember I was walking through, shaking everybody's hand, shaking Otto's hand. Then I got to Sister Debbie, and she said that Brother Wayne really looked up to me, and just to hear that, that's something, it's something that really meant a lot to me, and just what a blessing he was in my life, because I know anytime I would come to church, I could always count on, looking back and seeing Brother Wayne sitting back there, despite what he was going through, I could always look back there and see, seeing him fight the good fight of faith, and that's always something that encouraged me, something that anytime something would go on or something that would discourage me and something that would make me want to throw in the towel, I could always just look back and see that, he's still there, so it just always encouraged me to just keep going, to keep fighting. So
Wayne was someone that I looked up to, and I don't guess it's one particular moment that I will remember the most about Wayne, but there is one thing that I'll take back, and it is that he wanted me to succeed. And when I did well, he was just as happy as Dad was. And that's what I remember about him, is that he wanted the best for everybody. And when I did good, like I said, he rejoiced, with me, with Dad. And I know me and Dusty's so competitive, and later on in life I seen that in Dad and Wayne. It's so funny that I could still hear them talk, and when Dad would say, well, yeah, Ricky's preaching up at this church, Wayne would write back, yeah, well, Dusty's preaching here. And it was just the back and forth, I guess, competitiveness that I get come from them.
I guess it was December of 2000. I remember because I had just graduated high school in May, and I had signed to play baseball at Brevard College. My older sisters, Michelle, she had already at this time been married. She had two sons, Joshua and Jordan. Leslie had been married. They lived in Pennsylvania. They had two kids, Lindsay and JR. And then my sister Bridget was married at this time, and they just had the one child, Alex, at this point. They would eventually have a whole bunch more. If I try to name them, I'll probably forget, but you had Ace, Jag, Reese, and now Dash. So she's got a herd. But at this point, I remember it in my, stands out in my memory. I was at college as a freshman. It was in December. We had just finished our fall workouts, and I was in the gym fixing to just shoot ball or just kind of play around. I might even been going towards the weight room. And I had my cell phone with me, and the phone rang. It was my mother. And I'll never forget, she had called me that evening, and she was pretty tore up, pretty emotional. And the only words that I could really understand was, "Your dad has cancer." And immediately for me, you know, that was the terrible C word. That just, everyone that I'd ever known to ever have cancer has died, and died relatively quickly. So immediately I'm terrified. I'm literally torn apart at this point. And hearing her say these words, and even worse, I went back to my room, and I remember her saying at stage 4, his PSA scores are extremely high, which I later understood what that meant. But, and at that point, they wanted to do surgery just to see what they could do. They were afraid they would open him up and it would be spread, and there's nothing they could do. They just sewed him back up and he was done. But even at that time, they were giving him maybe a year or 2 years to live. And here I am, 18 years old, freshman in college. I don't have a wife yet. I don't have kids. I don't have a family. You know, my sisters had that at that point, but I didn't have any of those things that I had shared, you know, with my family. You know, I wanted to be able to share my dad with them. And that broke me. And I remember being an 18-year-old kid in my dorm room, literally laying face down on the old asbestos-filled, I'm sure, 8x8 tiles, and laying there on my face just weeping as hard as I could, just out of fear, thinking I'm going to lose my dad. And at that point, I learned at a very young age, you know, what the grace of God was, because I didn't have anybody to turn to. I couldn't really call my dad and talk about it. I couldn't talk to my mom. She was a basket case. My sisters, you know, they were falling apart inside too. And I didn't have anybody. I didn't even have a church at that point that I could turn to, because I'm off at college, you know, and I just felt like I was all alone. And that's when God really just kind of picked me up and you know, gave me grace during that time that you really don't understand until you're in that point. But so I remember that taking place, and I remember January the 3rd, 2001, he was going to have surgery, and we didn't know what was going to happen. You know, we were very scared of what was fixing to take place. Leslie had come down from Pennsylvania, my sisters came together, and we were going to have family portraits. And I remember on that day, January the 3rd, that morning, we had family portraits done. And that afternoon, he went into surgery. And what made it so scary was we were taking these pictures and looking back. You know, you can see it in our eyes in those pictures, that the fear of what was fixing to take place, because we didn't know what was going to happen when they opened Dad up. We didn't know. There was even a possibility in our minds they could open Dad up and he may not even wake up. I mean, he was in pretty bad shape. So we're terrified. And I remember we go up to Asheville, and after these pictures are done, and he has his surgery, and it was a long process, I think 3 hours or something like that. While he's having surgery, we go grab lunch. I remember at this kind of a fast food Japanese joint, but I remember going in there, and we go back, and I'll never forget sitting there in the waiting room. And now just to give you just a small preface, my mom and dad raised us in church, and Dad was a chain breaker for us. You know, his dad really suffered from PTSD. He drank. You know, he didn't raise his kids in a godly home. His dad, you know, my dad's grandfather, he drank so bad he couldn't even raise his family. Really, you know, his great grandfather or you know, cousins raised my grandfather, because he couldn't do it because he drank so much. I remember my dad as a kid would tell stories how he'd have to drive him home at 11 and 12 years old because he was drunk. So that's where he came from. And you know, when he got saved and gave his life to the Lord, he and my mother, they raised us in church. We knew what it was like to be raised in church, and they gave us a chance. And so Dad was extremely strong in the faith, and he believed in prayer. He believed in being in the Word of God. He believed in faithfulness to the house of God. So I remember his former pastor was pastoring up in Asheville at the time, and we went up there, and I remember they laid hands on my dad and they prayed. And I believe it's James 5:8. That, you know, it kind of shows you the path to take for prayer, for healing, all that stuff in the Word of God. And they prayed, and God done a miraculous thing there. And I remember he went into surgery. The doctor came out, and they said, "Sir," or family, you know, ma'am, talking to my mom, I guess, said, "We don't know how to explain this, but we took his prostate out. You know, you could tell it was pretty well eaten up." He said, "And you can see where the cancer was in his lymph nodes," which was just a disaster. The fact that if it's in his lymph nodes, he's done. And he said, "You could see where the cancer was in his lymph nodes, but we can't really explain it because it's gone. You can see traces of it where it had been there, but it's not there anymore." And they were able to sew him back up. And I'll never forget, as we're in there, and the doctor made this comment. He said, "You know," he said, "this is an extremely rare case." He said, "This man could live 10 or 20 more years, you know, with what's happened." He said, "In fact, cancer may not even be what kills him. It might be something else." And I remember sitting there at that point as an 18-year-old boy thinking, man, if I could just get 10 more years with my dad, how awesome would that be? You know, if I could, man, that made me 28. There's a good chance I could be married by then. I could have, you know, at least a child or two. They'd get to know who he is. And if I could get 10 more years with my dad, that would be awesome. And so I remember praying that and thinking that there in the parking lot, really, of the place where we were standing at that point. And that was an awesome feeling when that happened. And it was ups and downs, you know, for a long time. He would be on a treatment, he went through radiation and all this stuff, and there was highs and there were lows. You know, the highs were, man, PSA is at 0 and everything's looking good, the treatment's working, and we would just continue on with life. And did we ever continue on with life? We began to live, and I began to really appreciate my dad for who he was, and my mother too. And my mom had taken a job, and they had a place as a result of that down in Fort Myers, Florida. And every year we would take a trip down to Fort Myers. And my sister Bridget's kids would go down. My other sister Michelle, her son Josh was working for the company my mother was with, so he was living down there at that time at this property. And so they had this apartment. We would go down and just be together. You know, we'd go to spring training. The Red Sox were there. The Twins were there. We watched the Yankees play and all these things. We'd tour the stadiums and we'd spend time on the beach. We'd go to Sanibel Island. We'd go to Island Cow Restaurant. And that's what we did, and we loved it, every minute of it. And then we also had the lows, you know, because the treatment, the pills he was on wasn't working anymore. And his PSA started going up again. There was that just terrifying moment thinking, oh no, is this going to be it? Is this going to be the time? Is this where it ends right here? And then all of a sudden he'd start a new treatment. And all of a sudden it'd go back down and you're back on that high again. So really from the time he got cancer in December 2000 to the time he passed away, July the 25th, 2018, we were on that roller coaster. But boy, did we ever enjoy the ride. One of the great joys that I got with Dad, especially in the later years, was coaching baseball with him. We had such a good time. We had some really good teams, and we had some really bad teams. I remember one year, Brantley was probably 5 or 6 years old, and he was playing up because one of Bridget's sons, Jag, was I think 3 years older than Brantley, but he was playing on this team, so we moved Brantley up so they could play together. And boy, that might have been one of the worst teams that I've ever had the privilege to be a part of. I don't know that we won a game that year. It was pretty rough. It was pretty tough to deal with. But you know, we had a good group of boys. They had a good time together and made some great friendships. And actually, even before that, Ace, one of Bridget's other kids in her tribe, he was on a Little League team. It was, I think, the 10U team or something like that. Dad was coaching it, and he asked me to help him. And man, it was awesome. You know, again, it was a terrible team. Team was real bad. But that was the first time since I was in high school that my dad and I were on the field together, you know, as a team, as a combo. And that was awesome. And then every year from that point, as Brantley began to play and progress as a player from T-ball to machine pitch to kid pitch and all this, my dad was right there with me. And he was right there as the assistant coach, and I was the head coach. And it was awesome because I would coach third base, and he would coach first base, and it was just one of the greatest feelings in the world to be in the game, in the moment, and seeing, Brantley come up to the plate. And one year even Reese played with us, Bridges, one of the other Bridges kids in the tribe. We were playing, and Brantley would come up to the plate, and I'll never forget just looking over at Brantley. I'd kind of kneel down on my knees, and I look at Brantley, and I look over at my dad and think, man, this is the best life. This is life. And so that was really cool to experience that with him. And we won. We actually had 2 or 3 years right there where we won the championship. The first year, one of those years, we went undefeated. And I mean, just killed everybody the whole year. Went to the state tournament in the Cal Ripken League, went to the state tournament in the Tar Heel League, and actually advanced pretty far in the Tar Heel League tournament. The last 2 years we coached together, the last 2 years we were the champions. So we became champions, we defended our championship. In fact, that was the year that he started chemotherapy in March. And right at the beginning of the season, we had a couple practices before chemo. And I remember the day he had chemotherapy, we had ball practice. I think it was on a Tuesday. And I remember going out to the field, and Dad came, and of course we've been praying. And I had preached I've been preaching at Crossroads Rescue Mission, and Brother Aaron Bridges is the guy who kind of runs that with Brother Rocky. And man, he had all the guys come together and pray for my dad. And I mean, the Holy Ghost was present. It was just, if I ever thought there was healing taking place somewhere, it was in that moment. And I remember we prayed very hard that Dad would be able to go through chemo without, a great deal of struggle. And so at that practice on Tuesday, he had his first round of chemo. And I remember being at practice, he felt good. In fact, that first day, it kind of gives you energy from what I understand. He had taken it, he'd been at practice, he was doing good, he was happy, and everything seemed to be okay. And then I went to Georgia to a revival, and actually ended up preaching that Sunday morning about heaven and all these different things. And I came home that night, and the next day Dad was in ICU. He was in ICU for 5 days. We about lost him. So really, after that stint in ICU, we thought we was going to lose Dad. I felt like every day after that point, I was in the bonus rounds. And I didn't want to take a bit of it for granted. Anytime he called, wanted to go eat, I wanted to be there. Anytime he wanted to talk on the phone, I didn't care where I was, how big of or important the meeting was I had at work, or what was going on. I was going to do my best to answer that call and talk to my dad. And if I just couldn't, I would text him back immediately and say, Dad, I cannot talk right now. I will call you back as soon as I leave, because I wanted to hear his voice. And for the last 3 years of his life, I didn't erase one voicemail. I snapped every video I could of us just to have that memory. And man, we just wanted to capture every moment. But going back to the baseball, we had so much fun together, and he enjoyed that, not just with me, not just with my kids, but all of us, Bridget's kids, they all enjoyed baseball with my dad. He would take them to ball games, minor league games, or whatever it may be. I get tickets to the Braves game every year from a vendor that I work with, and every year it was just a tradition. I'd take, Autumn, at the time Brantley, my dad, and one of Bridget's kids. That's just how it worked out. Sometimes I'd get 6 tickets, sometimes I'd get 4, right behind home plate there in Atlanta. And we'd take us, and we'd take one of Bridget's kids. It'd be a different one every year. And then if you know how many kids she has, you could go for many years and not take the same kid. So, that was always fun. I remember we took Michelle's kids one time. They went and saw a Dodgers game. And we watched the Dodgers play the Braves, and Dad took them down there, and we experienced that together. And when we went up to Pennsylvania to see my other sister Leslie, we went to see to Camden Yards and saw the Orioles play. We rode up over to Philadelphia and watched the Phillies play. We'd ride up to New York and we'd see the Yankees play. So it was always that experience with my dad that I really loved, that he enjoyed, not just with me and my family, but my sisters too, and all the grandkids. We'd get together, and at some point, there might be a wiffle ball or something, break out in the yard, and we'd play wiffle ball, or we'd have a makeshift ball game right there at the house, and it was just always something. I remember in 2006, I had a friend of mine with the Chicago White Sox. He's actually still with the White Sox, and they were playing up in Boston at Fenway Park, and I asked him if he could get me tickets, and I wanted to see the stadium. I wanted to experience Fenway, and I wanted my dad to experience that with me. And I had no idea our seats were going to be right behind home plate. I mean, it was probably the best seats you can imagine at Fenway Park. And it was the the Red Sox and the White Sox. And I'll never forget that night. We're going to fly to Charlotte that morning. I think 4 o'clock was going to fly to Charlotte into Boston. And I couldn't sleep. I didn't sleep at all that night. It was just me and my dad. I think my mom might have been in Florida at the time. And it was just me and my dad right there. And we didn't sleep all night. I don't think he slept. I didn't sleep. We were both so excited. And we drove down and got on the plane there in Charlotte. We flew right into Boston. And it was raining when we were landing. When you finally got below the clouds, you just saw water, and you landed. And we took a nap, and then we just explored the city. And it was so awesome, walking around Boston with my dad. And went into this Italian restaurant off the main strip there. And all these old men beside of us would ask us what we went in town. We tell them it was with the Red Sox. They'd always tell us a story about, Yaz or Ted Williams or Jim Rice or Wade Boggs, whatever it was. They all had a story to tell. And we toured Fenway Park that next day, and that was so cool to be able to do that with my dad and get those pictures. And then we watched that game, and it was an awesome game. It felt like the stadium was going to explode, when the Red Sox won. Just a really cool experience with my dad. Going to these ball games was always fun, and I remember many times we'd go down to Atlanta, and we'd be driving back, and we'd always go to a game on a Saturday because it just worked out. You'd get off work on Friday, you couldn't get there in time, you didn't want to take a day off to do it, so we'd go down on Saturday morning and watch a game. And I wanted to get back for church on Sunday, and many nights we would drive, or I'd be driving, he'd be back in the passenger side. If you know Autumn, she's always asleep when you drive anyway. And so her and the kids would be in the back, and for 4 hours, me and Dad would exhaust our baseball knowledge, and just doing his best to keep me awake. But I loved it because, I'm a history buff, and I love the history of baseball, and I've watched all these videos, so I have a keen understanding of baseball in the 1940s and 50s and 60s and all this. So to be able to share this conversation with my dad about his childhood, and I actually know what he's talking about, and these players and what they did and what they accomplished. And I really fell in love with baseball around 1991. I loved it before that, but I guess it sticks out in my memory because 91's when the Braves started actually getting good. And so we would go through the lineup of the Braves in 91. Who was in it in 92? Who was in it in 93? Who was in it in 94? And we'd go through the pitching staff and all this stuff. And then literally before you knew it, we were home. And that's just what we did. That's how we passed the time. And we'd sit around the campfire at the campground. And that's what we talked about was baseball. And as I got older, he talked about Vietnam and different things. I remember one day we were sitting there, and we had fireworks going off at the campground, and there was a mountain kind of back there. He was describing kind of Hamburger Hill and all that stuff earlier that day, and the fireworks were going off, and he leaned over to me, and he said, "Son," he said, "do you hear those fireworks in between blasts, And I said, "Yeah." He said, "Now just imagine every time you hear one of those fireworks go off, there's bullets flying at you." And it kind of put in perspective what Dad had experienced and what he went through, but I thought that was pretty cool. It wasn't just baseball. At work, again, another vendor, I could get Charlotte Hornets tickets. They were great tickets. One day we might be courtside, another day we might be in a suite, with all the private dining you want and all this stuff. And I always wanted to take Dad with me because these were things that I treasured and I was enjoying, and not just going to a game, but actually going to a game, first class. And I wanted my dad to be able to do that with me. And I wanted my son and my kids, and again, Bridget's kids, they were always going. And so we I don't think any of them got to go to a game twice because we ended up taking all of them at some point or another. But I wanted to enjoy that with him, and that was just a part of what we did. We enjoyed sports. Every Super Bowl, I wanted to watch with my dad. Every World Series, I wanted to watch with my dad. The NCAA basketball championships, I wanted to watch with my dad. Probably one of the greatest traditions that we had in the Davis house was at Christmas time. We would all get together, all the kids would come together, grandkids. It'd just be a crowd of people. And, because again, we had our 2 kids, Michelle, had her kids, which now have kids, of course, Bridget's tribe, all them would come over. And we'd have Christmas, and every Christmas we would have bingo. play Christmas bingo, or I think that's what we called it. And Daddy would always be the one to call out the name, and you had to match it on your board. So Christmas bingo would be, you would have to match everything front, or up and down, left to right, or diagonal. It was always based on a scriptural or a Christmas terminology. Christ child, poinsettia, holy choir, that kind of stuff would be a part of what it was, Noel or something like that. But Dad couldn't quite pronounce the words just right. So, instead of poinsettia, when he would call it out, we'd all be sitting there, and of course, we're all around the table. He'd say, poinsettia, and we'd all bust out laughing. We had heard it 100 times. It was always funny. Yuletide, something like that. And it was just always fun. And once you got it, you got a scratch off lottery ticket. Nobody ever won anything big, maybe $5 or $10 or something. We always got a scratch off lottery ticket. And we'd always Daddy would buy he would buy just droves of glass bottle Cokes and Mountain Dews and Sun Drops and Dr. Peppers, and that was a part of the giveaway. When you won, you got to pick out the drink you wanted, and there'd be gift cards to Outback or Chili's or Longhorn and all that stuff, and you wanted to get that gift card. You didn't take your family out to eat. So in the end, I believe it always worked out. We all got gift cards to go eat. We always got drinks, the glass bottle sodas. And we all got at least a few scratch-off tickets to see if we could win $1 million. We never did, but that was always fun. I remember probably one of the greatest moments in my life with Dad was this year, January the 8th, he turned 70. And the fact that he made it to 70, in my mind, in my heart, was a miracle. Because I remember 18 years ago, standing there as an 18-year-old kid thinking, man, if I could get 10 more years with my dad, that is a win. So here we are 18 years later, and Dad turned 70, and I wanted to throw him a surprise birthday party. I just wanted to do it. And I'll never forget, we got it all together. It wasn't last minute. We planned it out, but we got it all together and had all the family there and some of his close friends there. And we had it here at my house, and we had everybody parked at the church up the street, and I would shuttle people, back and forth. And we all got here. Everybody was kind of tucked in here in the house, and Dad was coming through the front door. I walked he and Mom in, and Dad was asking where the kids were. He just couldn't understand when he walked through the front door why the kids wasn't at the door to meet him, because they always were. They loved Papa Wayne. And so he's asking, where's the kids? Where's the kids? And you can see on the video that I walked through the front door, and I'm kind of standing at the stairs trying to get Dad to come on in. And finally, he was unsuspecting, didn't have any idea, and he walked through. As you come into our living room, it opens up, and everybody was standing kind of piled in the living room and the kitchen, and yelling surprise, and you could just see the joy in his eyes and how happy he was about that. And to get to do that for him on his, what would be his last birthday, was really special. I'm glad we got to do that to honor my dad.
Several years ago, my mother-in-law was wanting to buy a camper, a fifth-wheeler, and I started looking around, found one for sale, and it happened to be, the owners of it was Yount-Davis. And so I gave him a call because I knew Dusty from baseball, and he said, yeah, we've got one for sale, and we went up there, and that introduced us to Wayne and Debbie, who had a camper right beside Dusty's up there. So anyhow, it started a friendship for us. But anyhow, I was saying, Wayne, now how do I know you? And he said, well, let me ask you a question. He says, you ever been over to Emerson's? And of course, if you know what Emerson's is, it's a girls' dancing place in Hickory. And he said, yeah, I used to dance over there at Emerson's.
I met Wayne Davis back in the early 80s. After I got out of the Marine Corps. I was good friends with his brother Terry, but anyway, we were good friends, and I was over at their house a lot, over at Fireball and his wife's house. And but we were playing on a basketball team at Valdez Recreation Center back in the early 80s, and Wayne was like our player coach. He was 11 years older than me, and and I respected him a lot because, you know, he was a Marine, a Vietnam era Marine. And that was before I got saved back in those days. And you know, I was not the greatest sport, you know, playing basketball and things like that. And I remember this one game where the referees were making terrible calls, according, at least in my opinion. I never fouled anybody ever. So, but anyway, I think I'd already got a technical foul, and I was wired up, you know. And I came over to the bench, and just like Wayne says all the time, you know, he told me, he said, look. He said, man, we need you in this game. You need to just calm down. He said, I know that jerk's missing a lot of calls, but he said, don't sweat the small stuff. And he defused the situation, you know, there. And that was my first really experience with Wayne, him doing that and calming me down. At the church here, I don't know, a month ago maybe. After church, I was sitting over talking to Wayne, and a man named goes to our church named Michael. I'll just say his name. But Wayne all of a sudden said, Michael was standing there talking to Wayne too, and me and Wayne said, "Who's that woman over there hugging Pearl, showing everything she's got?" And there was a lady over there bent over hugging my mother-in-law Pearl, and you know, she wasn't showing everything she had, but you could see the back of her legs on down. And Michael looked over and goes, "Oh, that's just my wife." And he did that, Billy. He didn't say, you know, I would have probably said, "Hey, man, I'm sorry. I was just kidding, you know, I didn't mean that." But Wayne just went, ha, 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 ha. And that's one of the last funny things I remember about him.
I'd like to tell him that I've always, forever enjoyed fixing chicken livers and oyster stew for him.
When I think of Brother Wayne, he was always kind, loved our family. He was always trying to support our ministry if he could. And one of the things Dusty said is he was tight on money. So to know that he would give to us and share to us means that it was really special. And he took our kids go-karting and just included them, and they didn't call him Pawpaw, but he just included them in just like they were one of his. It was special to a mama's heart to see that. And Miss Debbie is just a lady that I admire. It's like, I want to be like her one day. It's kind of my thing. And
my fondest memories of him is relaxing at the camp meeting and just coming back. He'd mosey around the property, come back, tell stories of things down at the lake or wherever he went. Tell us
the
about
kids
it.
on rides.
And like Lydia said, his giving spoke volumes. In fact, the fall of 2017, that we actually found a check from him that was expired. Did not know we even had it, that he had given it to us. It was a $1,000 check. Of course, it was no good because it was expired, but it's...
The Lord knows.
When we went to hear Dusty preach down there at Brother Rocky's, I got the pleasure to drive the van, and Brother Wayne got the ride front seat with me. Carl Peppard actually rode in the back seat, which is unusual, rode in the middle, and we was going down there, and Brother Wayne got to talking to Brother Carl about their times serving in the military, or Marines for Brother Wayne, and they started talking about GPS, looking for directions. We got to arguing about which way to go, and I told them it was up to them. And next thing you know, Brother Wayne said, "Well, Brother Carl, you're the navigator." And Brother Carl said, "No, brother, you're the navigator." And they started hollering back and forth using some military lingo that I had no idea of understanding. And they started telling some stories about Vietnam, and it was just a neat experience for me, being as young as I am, not being living during Vietnam, to get to see that and experience that.
I think it's real easy, you know, to take your dad for granted, you know, because you're with him all the time, and sometimes you don't know what you have until you look back years in the future and realize, man, I really had a legend as my dad. I mean, he really was one of the most incredible men that there has ever been. You know, from being a legendary ball player back in the day to being a legendary soldier, to being the father that he was to us, to being the coach that he was to us, and just the example. And I tell you, looking back, I'm very thankful and very appreciative that he was my dad, and And he truly was, and will always be in my mind, the legend.
Brother Wayne, I'll miss you, bud.
Wayne, I'm gonna miss you. You'll be in here forever, and thank you for all the wonderful memories. I love you.
I'm just proud to say that I was a friend of Wayne.
Just so hard for me to explain how much he meant to me. And he's my friend, and I miss him.
Today I'm a little bit better person for getting to know him.
I am so thankful for their friendship, continue to enjoy being around their family and the impact they made on our lives, and looking forward to seeing him one day again.
I love Wayne, and he will be missed.
Wait and see you on the other side.
Cancer might get us on this side. The other side will be a homecoming day. And I thank God for that.
He made an impact on everyone's life. Everyone he met, he made an impact on, and it was a positive impact.
I'll see you on the other side, Marine. Semper Fi.
This event today has not been a sad one for me. Today, I'm very proud. What a send-off. What a send-off.
Dear younger me, it's not your fault. You were never meant to carry this beyond the cross, no. Dear younger me, you are holy, you are righteous, you are one of the redeemed, set apart a brand new heart. Oh, you are free indeed. And every mountain, every valley, through each heartache you will see. Every moment brings you closer to who you were meant to be, dear younger me. I'm gonna wrap my arms around my daddy's neck and tell him that I've missed him. And tell him all about the man that I became and hope that it pleased him. There's so much I wanna say, so much I want you to know. When I finally made, when I finally make it home, then I gaze upon the throne of the King, frozen in my steps. And all the questions that I swore I would ask, words just won't come yet. I'm so amazed at what I've seen, so much more than this old mind can hold. When I finally make it home, when I finally make it home, and the sweetest sound these ears have yet to hear, the voices of the angels. When I finally make it home, when I finally make it home, He was a giant when I was just a kid. I was always trying to do everything he did. I can still remember every lesson he taught me, growing up, learning how to be like my old man. He was a lion. We were a father's pride, but I was defiant when he made me walk the line. He knew how to lift me up and when to let me fall. Looking back, he always had a plan. My old man. My old man, feel the callus on his hands and dusty overalls. My old man, now I finally understand. I have a lot to learn from my old man. I'm a giant. Got a son of my own. He's always trying to go everywhere I go. Do the best I can to raise him up the right way, hoping that he someday wants to be like his old man.
Is Brantley gonna have a seed? Brantley's got a seed. Oh, the hook. Left-handed sky hook.
Hey, I tell you what, first of all, I'd like to thank my Lord Jesus Christ, my Savior, for my great abilities He's bestowed upon me. I feel great about being the champ again. I knew when this little guy come out, he had no place to be declared a man like me. I have the touch. I have the touch. I am the king.
I hope he's proud of who I am. I'm trying to fill the boots of my old man. My old man.
They say sometimes you win some, sometimes you lose some. And right now I'm losing bad. I've stood on this stage night after night, reminding the broken it'll be alright. But right now, oh, right now I just can't. It's easy to sing when there's nothing to bring me down. But what will I say when I'm held to the flame like I am right now? I know you're able and I know you can. Safe through the fire with your mighty hand. But even if you don't, my hope is you alone. They say it only takes a little faith to move a mountain. Good thing a little faith is all I have right now. But God, when you choose to leave mountains unmovable, oh, give me the strength to be able to sing. It is well with my soul. I know you're able and I know you can. Safe through the fire with your mighty hand. But even if you don't, my hope is you alone. I know the sorrow, I know the hurt would all go away if you just say the word. But even if you don't, my hope is you alone. I want a fresh bagel. Bagel. Carl. They say it only takes a little faith to move a mountain. Good thing a little faith is all I have right now. But God, when you choose to leave mountains unmovable, oh, give me the strength to be able to sing, it is well with my soul. I know you're able and I know you can save through the fire with your mighty hand. But even if you don't, my hope is you alone. I know the sorrow, I know the hurt would all go away if you just say the word. But even if you don't, my hope is you alone. I still believe you. Oh, it is well with my soul. It is well. It is well with my soul. It is well with my soul. It is well. It is well with my soul.
Upon his face, amen. Save me by his grace. He takes me by the hand and leads me through the promised land. What a day, glorious day that will be.
This day, Lord, we thank you for an opportunity, God, to be back in your house one more time, God. God, it's wonderful, Lord, to in your presence and to feel your presence, Heavenly Father. Jesus, be with us, God. Breathe upon us. Answer the prayer. Send your glory upon this service. God, oh, Heavenly Father, heal the ones, God, that need healing, God, and save the ones that need saving, Heavenly Father, God. Everything's for your glory, God, not for our glory, but let it all be for you and the will of your kingdom, God. Be with this country, God, as we go in another year, God. Another July the 4th, another celebration, oh Heavenly Father, God. Breathe upon this country one more time, God. Give us the wisdom and the strength, God, to follow your will, God, not man's will, sweet Jesus, God. Be with this service today, oh God. Touch us today, oh Heavenly Father. And let it all be for your glory and